Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Eden Road podcast, where on today's show, we're going to be previewing Liverpool's visit to the Gtech on Saturday night. I'm glad to say, as always, Neil Atkinson of the Anfield Wrap joins me for this one. Neil, how you doing?
Very well indeed. Yourself?
Yes, all good, all good. Just before we get going, remember to drop a comment down below with your thoughts ahead of the Liverpool game. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels. Follow us on the socials at the Ealing Road on Twitter, at Ealing Road Pod on Instagram. Neil, there's only one place to start, really. We were just talking before we started recording. UCL last night in the Champions League. Has the rot stopped?
It has, because they didn't lose. If you lose 4 on the bounce and then you don't lose 1, then that helps massively. I think that in general, there's still obviously going to be a lot for Liverpool to work on across the next few weeks. It's important that they keep working on that whilst winning. Winning last night was really important. Having not beaten Galatasaray, I think everyone is still. When I say everyone, I think a lot of people, and I include a lot of mainstream journalists, not least because they decided that they all didn't like the system. A lot of people still aren't entirely got to grips with the Swiss system and the way in which it operates. If Liverpool hadn't have won last night, they'd have been really quite snookered as to how they were going to come in the top 8 and increasingly under a bit of pressure even to make the top 24. So the result was really important. If you want to come in the top 8 and you don't beat your pot 4 team away, which we didn't, we got beat by Galatasaray, you can come under a lot of pressure quite quickly. As it is now, Liverpool are on 6 points from a possible 9. And now they've got more home games than away remaining. They've still got to play both of the pot 1 teams, Real Madrid and Inter Milan, Madrid at home and Milan away. But if they can find a way through to taking only 3 points from them, they should now be in a position where it's possible they could still come into the top 8, and will almost certainly finish in a playoff place moving forward. So last night was significant in that sense, but it was also significant because the manager made a few changes. They were the changes that I think a number of people wanted. There was one I wanted in particular, which I was very glad to see him make, which was him not starting Alexis Mac Allister. I thought that made a massive difference to Liverpool's ability to play, frankly. I think that Mac Allister's been a brilliant Liverpool player so far. He's clearly been a brilliant footballer for 4 or 5 years, but at the minute, he just looks physically not up to the task. So him not playing last night, seeing Sabos like Curtis Jones and Florian Wirtz all work well together, I think it felt really, really good to see. So hopefully that's something to build on.
You mentioned Mac Allister. We'll talk about some of the other players that aren't quite in form, but let's talk about the rot in the Premier League. And obviously you mentioned Galatasaray as well, because there's been so much coverage of it. What has been Liverpool fans' perspective on the start to the season, late winners included right at the start?
It's late winners and now it's late. I mean, there isn't a word for late defeaters. It's been late. Late winners going to the opposition. I think it was important in all directions. I think it's been important not to get carried away. Liverpool are the better side than Bournemouth for an hour, and then there's a bit of sloppiness that lets Bournemouth back in, and then Liverpool power away from Bournemouth. The Newcastle game was frustrating because Liverpool, they'd gone down to 10 men. It was like a cup final, but a cup final away from home because of everything that was going on with Alexander Isak and the way Newcastle play. It was a pretty intense affair, but Liverpool got themselves 2-0 up, and it was through a bit of sloppiness, really, again, that they gave Newcastle some encouragement and some hope. And Liverpool deserved to beat Bournemouth, but they didn't really deserve to beat Newcastle. They were there for the taking first half against Arsenal, but Arsenal didn't want to do any taking. And second half, they were the better side and deserved, I think, to edge it. So that's absolutely fine and straightforward. And then we had the first international break, and then we came back and we were the better side of Burnley. Burnley did what we all know that Burnley are going to do when someone like Liverpool comes to town. But Liverpool kept banging on the door, and they got what they deserved out of that one. Better side than Atletico Madrid, and there were 2 goals that I think could have been not given for offside, and they were both deflections. The Atletico Madrid goals, the XG on that game was something like 2.8 versus 0.4, and somehow it ends as a 3-2. And everyone says, "Oh, it's like all the other Liverpool games," but it really wasn't. Liverpool were much the better side. And then again against Everton, they were really good for the first half, Liverpool. And it was the end of a long week. And I think that part of what's underpinning some of these Liverpool issues is that there is a fitness problem around the squad. And what I mean by that is this isn't to act as though Liverpool players aren't fit. It's that Liverpool's players are all at different points of fitness. So Mac Allister, aforementioned, I think his fitness has been all over the place. He didn't get a pre-season. Both right backs, Bradley, Frimpong gets injured again last night, but Bradley and Frimpong both got early injuries. So Liverpool had a problem there. I think that there's Isak's fitness has obviously been a thing because he doesn't get a pre-season. And this is just sort of potted through the team. But the manager, the only way to get players match fitness, the manager concludes, is to play them. But if while you're playing them, they're not playing very well, you end up in a bit of bother. So Liverpool had this arduous week that ended with Everton, and they were really good for an hour, got themselves, well, for 50 minutes, got themselves 2-0 up, and then just managed the game through 1-2-1. And again, it feels close, but Everton only had 2 shots after the 60th minute. So Liverpool just kept them at arm's length. I think it's a good performance. That's the end of the winning in the league. That's where we got up to, and then the results started to turn against us. We were absolutely dreadful away at Crystal Palace in the first half. But by the time it goes 1-1, allowing for the idea that when the half-time whistle goes, Liverpool should be 3-0 down. By the time they weren't, and by the time it goes 1-1, you can argue Liverpool have deserved to score 2 goals themselves in the second half, if you see what I mean. It goes 1-1, and then they were poor. And this is an important thing. It got back to 1-1, and then they were poor. And that pattern recurs. So against Chelsea, it gets back to, Liverpool concede with the first shot, like they did against Crystal Palace, concede with the first shot. But they're not very good for the rest of the first half. They weren't as bad as they were at Palace. I think Chelsea weren't as good as Palace as well. But they get through to half-time. Liverpool are the better side. It goes 1-1. Liverpool aren't very good. And the reason for that, I think, is partially psychological. I think it's one of those things where some players are desperate to make it 2-1. Some players are taking the point. Difficult away game, which both Chelsea and Palace were. And then the same thing happens against Manchester United. Liverpool concedes the first shot, rest the game back, get some control, better side, creating tons of opportunities, go 1-1. Liverpool are not very good at 1-1. Really poor at 1-1 against Manchester United. So there's a few things in here, and none of it is as straightforward. There has just been a little bit of bad luck. There is the questions around fitness. There is the question around these players getting used to playing with each other. All of these things are valid things. But as ever in football, if you try to say it's just one answer, it's not going to be one answer. So it's why last night was important in that Liverpool got to play a game of football whilst they were winning, which they haven't been able to do since all the way back to that Everton game. Liverpool had not been ahead in a game, League or Champions League game, right the way back until mid-September. And football's a much easier game when the scoreboard's on your side. It's a much, much easier game, and Liverpool showed that last night.
You mentioned the psychological aspect there. How do you think Slot has handled this kind of recent dip, would you say? In terms of like his in-game subs, the way he cuts the figure on the touchline, how would you assess it? Do you think
I think
to me, he looks a little bit more agitated than he did last season, obviously, because the team's losing.
Well, I think the team's losing, so he's a little bit more agitated, but I think his in-game subs have been very good. What I've got less sympathy for is he keeps coming out and doing post-match press conferences saying the opposition didn't set up the way we expected. And this happens to us all the time, he says. And yeah. And I don't think it entirely stands up in a couple of those games either. Yes, Man United didn't start Sesko, and everyone expected them to. But apart from that, they still played Amarim's 3-4-3. Didn't come as, there's no shock there. What did Oliver Glasner do? He played 5-2-3. That's what he does every single game. That's not a surprise either. Yes, it's a bit of a surprise he plays Kamada ahead of Hughes in a game like that one and decides to be a little bit more progressive, but there was no real shock there either. But Slot's in-game subs have been excellent. With the exception possibly of Endo at Chelsea, which was ridiculous. The rest of them, I think, have all been pretty spot on. And so you can't, I wouldn't sort of lambast them. And I think the ones that have really made a difference, really changed games. I think, that's there against Arsenal, going all the way back to that one. That's there, to sort of spool through. I think he gets everything right at Burnley in terms of turning the screw when we need to get something. And then you can come through to Chelsea, where I think his subs are really, really strong and make a real positive difference. And I think the same thing happens against Manchester United. Not entirely on board with the last one, but if you're making 5 subs and I'm saying 4 of them are spot on, then, you can. Yeah. So I think that is, and there's a little thing where until we beat teams that play a back 3 on a pretty regular basis, we're going to play a lot of teams that play a back 3. If you're the sort of manager who isn't a system manager, then what you will end up doing when you now face Liverpool is you looked at this body of evidence that Liverpool don't like playing against a back 3. They especially don't like playing against a 5-2-3 or a 3-4-3, however you want to phrase it. Those teams have had a fair bit of success against Liverpool, so this is a way to beat Liverpool. Well, yeah, so beat those teams, and then people need to start to come up with another idea.
You might have a chance on Saturday night. We were talking about it on our pod whether Keith Andrews is going to go with a 4 or a 5, but we just don't know at this point because we were really good against West Ham in a 4. But we've been good against Chelsea in a 5. We've been good in other games in a 5 as well. But just before we get on to the game,
he will go with a 5. He will go.
I think, I think he will. I think he will. I think he should. But the key for me, and the thing that we've been frustrated with Andrews, is that if there is only a goal in it, then you've got to change it and go a little bit more progressive and actually apply some pressure, which he hasn't done thus far. But just on Liverpool, because I want to kind of go a bit deeper on some of the players. The fullbacks in particular have been getting a lot of heat, a lot of coverage. Starting with Frimpong, does Slot fancy him, and is he a fullback?
I think when he's played at fullback, with the exception of the first 20 minutes against Southampton, I think he's played really well. I think the issue is that he's now, I think this is now his 3rd injury since he signed for us, which, last night, which I think is a bit of a concern. I think there's also something else which I think goes deeper than Slot and is thrown open into Liverpool's recruitment in general, is that whether we like it or not, and to be crystal clear, I don't, the Premier League this year is much more obsessed with aerial duels and with set pieces.
Yeah.
I haven't really got a problem with sides, especially sides with less budget, focusing on set pieces. What I've got a problem with is the length of time set pieces now appear to take in football. The game works for me because it flows as a continuous whole. That said, the game is the game, and you could see the direction of travel last season, and Liverpool have bought 2 fullbacks who, in Kerkez and Frimpong, of whom it is reasonable to describe them as diminutive. If you buy those 2 fullbacks, you buy Florian Wirtz, who's 5'8", and 2 of your other key players are Alexis Mac Allister and Mo Salah, then if you're looking to defend set pieces, you're already making your life harder than it needs to be. And the other players, the bigger players, they're all acutely aware of that. So for me, that's the defining concern really about the 2 fullback signings. I think Bradley, again, got an injury in pre-season and got another one quite quickly after the season started, but he's not looked the player we thought we had on our hands 2 years ago or even 1 year ago. I think he's found things a little bit difficult, and the manager has aggressively picked Kerkez over Robertson until last night. It's felt like in key games. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. He's put the money down on Kerkez. Well, they've put the money down on Kerkez. And I think that they've wanted to crack on with that. But Liverpool now need to get results. And I like Kerkez, and I think he's played well, ironically, in the bigger games. I thought he was good second half against Manchester United. But I think I would, for this one on Saturday, for instance, I will be playing Robertson and then going from there. I think that needs to become a bit more of a role share now. I think it's being dominated so far by Kerkez, but I think for the next couple of weeks, I just wouldn't mind seeing Robertson get back in there with his experience, but also with his better range of passing from the position. Kerkez's passing has been difficult, and the way Liverpool have set up hasn't helped him. If there is a criticism of the manager for a couple of the selections recently, I would argue that when you look at the team selection, it's always good to work out the 2 or 3 players this team selection is meant to make life easier for and get the most out of. And I think Liverpool's last night being a little bit different, Liverpool's last few team selections at times has felt like it's made it harder for everybody. And that's not a good thing. And Kerkez's first half against Manchester United was one of them. There was no one near him. His passing's not the best. So you're asking someone whose passing's not being what you want it to be spraying 30, 40-yard balls to be able to find a red shirt. Well, that's not fair. It's just not fair, So I think Kerkez is, but I think that now Robertson performing as he did last night against Frankfurt, I think that Robertson and Kerkez now should just be on a bit more of a job share, and then we go from there.
You mentioned his inability to kind of spray 30, 40-yard passes. I think what I'm going to ask next. Are you missing Trent?
Yeah, definitely. But
Trent,
yeah, of course. I mean, I'm rightly, because he was incredible. And back when I was saying he was incredible, when people were determined to act as though he should never play right back and barely should be considered a functioning footballer, well, that's not changed. I think he's incredible, and I think he made a real difference to Liverpool, not just last season, but for a number of seasons. He was like having a little bit of a cheat code. You could build in a certain way at the back, and then if you needed to, this fella could, in almost any way, and towards the end with almost any foot, move you 50, 60 yards up the pitch right onto someone's toe. Liverpool haven't got that this season, and I think that's been one of the problems that they've been trying to solve, and they've been trying to solve it whilst, as I say, battling with some other. It's not like they've just lost Trent. Everything else stayed the same, and the players have all been the best versions of themselves. They've lost Trent, and the midfield controller looks profoundly and deeply unfit. And that can sound unbelievably unfair. I love Alexis Mac Allister, but he is Liverpool's primary progressor of the ball through the middle of the park. And this season, he just looks a shadow of his former self. And so Liverpool aren't just trying to solve the Trent thing. They're doing it in the context of working that out, whilst trying to work out how to integrate Florian Wirtz, whilst dealing with the fact that, for one reason or another, Salah's not quite where you want him to be. Dealing with Alexander Isak and his integration into fitness and form, not having Luis Diaz, who was a really good outball for Liverpool. He's gone and moved on. Nunez was a really good outball for Liverpool as well. Nunez, say what you want, you always knew he was playing. He was constantly getting himself involved in games. He's gone as well, and he loved to chase what looked like a lost cause. That helped pressure the opposition. It gave you more of an out, meant you could go a bit more direct. So Liverpool are trying to solve all of that, not just deal with the fact that Trent Alexander-Arnold's gone. So I think that all of that sort of brought itself to bear a little bit, and there's still, still more to be done in the area.
I want to touch on a couple more players before we move on to Brentford. You just mentioned Salah. I think he's the big one. And is it?
I don't think he's the big one.
You don't think he is? What's the big one then? So
Mac Allister's the big one. Mac Allister's the big one. Mac Allister. So it's really important to be fair on this. So Mac Allister, I think, across the last 4 years, you can make an argument he's been amongst the most important midfielders, if not the most important midfielder in world football. And he's also had the most intense 4 years you can imagine. So he's gone from not being picked very regularly to for Brighton, to suddenly being a mainstay for Brighton, playing for Roberto De Zerbi, who is one of the most intense managers on the planet, to being the most important midfielder and the player Leo Messi most like playing with for Argentina. An Argentinian side that's won the World Cup and the Copa America in the last couple of seasons, with Alexis Mac Allister playing a key role in all of that. He then moves from Brighton to then go and play for Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool, at the point where Jurgen Klopp ratchets the intensity absolutely through the ceiling. So he has a year of intensity playing for Jurgen Klopp. Klopp leaves, and then he plays for Arne Slot in Liverpool's league-winning team, where he's the most important midfielder. My point here is that that's 4 years that will take a toll on any player. Just because Mac Allister is not 32 doesn't mean he can't have a period of time here where his fitness isn't quite right. I think if you look at a number of Premier League players, Phil Foden's a good example. Declan Rice, I thought, for the first half of last season, after England went really deep into the Euros, is another good example. Ollie Watkins last season is another good example after a big summer as well with England. There's a number of Premier League players who I think have suffered for consistency and performance, because not only is the onus on them to produce game in, game out domestically, but they end up with big international challenges as well. And so I think ultimately, Mac Allister's clearly had an injury. We don't know what it is, but there's been some form of surgery. When Liverpool win the league, end of April, Liverpool still have 4 games left, and Mac Allister isn't even on the bench for any of them. He completely disappears. He comes back on the pitch when we lift the trophy, but he's not picked. He's past the celebrations, but he just completely disappears. He doesn't report back in time for Liverpool's pre-season. That takes us all the way through until sort of the start of August, before Mac Allister is approaching being a going concern. But Arne Slot picks him. And the reason why Arne Slot picks him is the same reason as Jurgen Klopp picks him, De Zerbi picks him, Scaloni picks him. Managers love picking him, and players love playing with him. So if you can pick Alexis Mac Allister, you pick Alexis Mac Allister. And where I think Liverpool have ended up this season, and I thought he was a shadow, a go. It was like playing with 10 against Man United. It was like playing with 10, because you pick him and he can't even drag a man anymore. What happens is the opposition work out, and this is why it is different to Salah. The opposition work out. You know what? We can almost just leave him alone. He cannot impose his will onto football matches. He's never been a remarkably fit footballer. We know that there's some footballers, and you see them, and not only are they brilliant at football, but they're obviously hugely gifted athletes. They're 6'3", broad shoulders. They have the body of a model. All of that sort of stuff. That is not Alexis Mac Allister. Alexis Mac Allister, to me, has always presented as a remarkably gifted and talented footballer in a relatively normal person's body, that they've got as fit as humanly possible so he can play football. And as it stands, he cannot physically impact games, and yet Arne Slot has picked him and picked him and picked him and picked him. And it's therefore difficult to assess Liverpool's midfield, the shape, the way in which it's approaching things, because there's this enormous problem of this brilliant footballer, but who just cannot get there. And as I say, Foden's a good example in recent years, and I think he's the most extreme example, but there are other ones, and there are a few Man City comparisons here. I used to find watching Guardiola's City to be a little bit, there'd be players who didn't feature for 6 months, and then suddenly they were on every team sheet for 6 months. well, and they were brilliant, and it didn't make a ton of sense. Then there'd be some players who were great one year, and then the following year, for the first 3 months of the season, would play like an absolute drain. And you think, well, this is weird, and why is Guardiola doing this, and why is that? So I think that the load and the burden that's been on Mac Allister is a big, big part of this. The manager wants to play him back into being fully fit. That's what he was clearly doing against Manchester United, but it backfired in a big, big way. And Liverpool's job at the minute, I would be quite happy. Liverpool got a League Cup game after this one. I think you have as well, haven't you? Liverpool got a League Cup game next week, and I wouldn't pick Mac Allister for the game against Brentford, and I'd only bring him on if Liverpool were 2 goals clear. That's the extent to which this has got. I'd play him against Palace in the League Cup in the midweek. If you want to get him some time, get him some rhythm, get him some match fitness, play him against Palace. I wouldn't have him anywhere near a starting lineup, and he's the major problem. Salah's always gone through some degree of a peak and a trough with his form. But I think Salah, there was a plan to redeploy or to use Salah a little bit differently this season. But that's sort of gone out the window because of the nature of the games, the fact that Liverpool have found the games a little tougher. I think that they've just sort of ended up needing a bit more from Salah. And he's just not been quite able, for one reason or another, to deliver it. It was better against second half against Chelsea and against Manchester United. He was more involved. He was missing chances, which I know you don't want. I'd rather he was scoring chances, but the point was he was actually getting involved in the game and was contributing by not contributing, if you see what I mean. So I'm of the view that with Salah, a little bit of patience and a little bit. He's the one, obviously, of the lads who I think have found it difficult. He's the one that I persevere with the most. For now, but also it's absolutely fine if Mo Salah does need to be given a little bit of time, if Liverpool do need to do it a little bit differently, because ultimately you don't win anything in October or November, but you can lose it. If Liverpool, to use those 2 players as a really good example, if we could get the 8, 9, 10 out of 10 versions of Salah and Mac Allister from February to May, then we are very likely to pick up a piece of major silverware, unless we've absolutely ruined it at this point. So this is now the pressure point for the manager, really, is working out who he runs with and when and why, and being able to go from there.
I'm very aware that we've been talking about all of Liverpool's problems. Who has impressed so far this season, in particular, apart from the ones you mentioned already?
Yeah, been loads of good, but Sabozlai's been absolutely brilliant. He's having a really good season. Gravenberch has been excellent. He's having a very, very good season. I think when he calms down a bit at the minute, the captain has been stupendously good. He's just got himself, I think, at times into a little bit of a situation where he's felt he needs to do everything. When he actually goes through Mac Allister against Manchester United, and the referee should stop the game. It's a head injury, but it's a head injury because Virgil tries to win a ball that's not his to win, but he's trying to win it because he knows that Alexis Mac Allister's a wreck and he wants to be front-footed. But when he's not been doing that, Van Dijk's been very, very good indeed. I think that the output of Gakpo has been good. He's a frustrating player, but he's still supplying goals and assists for Liverpool. Hugo Ekitike's been good. And we're now in a position to be able to say Florian Wirtz has been good. I found it a little bit odd, his use so far this season. Again, maybe the manager's felt that's the one he can most compromise on, to stick with some degree of familiarity. But, a lot of those games I mentioned before, whilst Wirtz wasn't quite the creative fulcrum you'd have liked him to be, firstly, he grafted, but also secondly, in a number of these games, he was just beginning to come to the boil at the point at which he was substituted. I thought he was very good second half against Arsenal, and Zubimendi didn't know what to do with him. Declan Rice then gets sucked into trying to deal with him, and suddenly Liverpool have got more space for everybody else to play because Wirtz is attracting opposition attention, and now there's more Szoboszlai in the game. He was very, very good last night against Frankfurt. And so I would just like to see the manager persevere with him now across the next league and Champions League games. I'd be playing him, starting him Saturday. I'd then start him against Villa. Then we've got Real Madrid, and then we've got Man City, and I'd pick him in all them and go from there. He doesn't have to worry about the League Cup. The other one, I think, who I like to see more of, even though he's not a perfect footballer, is Curtis Jones. I think he's played really well this season. There's an issue there's an issue Liverpool have got.
Game against Arsenal when he came on.
Oh, he's brilliant. He was brilliant. Yeah. There's a slight issue with his game, which is he doesn't quite have that pessimist's attitude when he's playing as one of the deeper midfielders. I think that you need basically someone to be playing in the middle of the park who constantly thinks the building's about to be on fire. And Jones just doesn't quite have that. I think when he's locked into the mode of a more defensive mode, he can do it. But what he can't do is almost flip between the modes of we're on the front foot. Oh, Christ, it's all about to go badly wrong. He stays in, we're on the front foot a little bit too long, and that's something for him to work on. But I think he's been excellent. I thought he was really good last night again, and I will be very, very eager for him to start on Saturday as well.
Let's talk about Saturday then. You just mentioned it there. Before the game specifically, what did you make of the Keith Andrews appointment at Brentford?
Fine. I think if you don't think Brentford are a well-run club making smart decisions, then you're just not paying attention. So I think it all feels a bit left field, but I just trust that the people in charge in Brentford know what they're doing. And until it's proven otherwise, I think Brentford to me stands out as a club who do two things really, really well. One is to make information-based decisions. And then the other one is to show a lot of patience around those decisions. And pretty consistently, not always, but pretty consistently, those things come off. So, and also the other thing to say is that the manager of Brentford, I suspect, more than maybe almost any other club in the country, is just one cog in the machine. And if again, I would trust, therefore, the machine to know what shape its cog needs to be a little bit more than we do as outsiders. So I was quite comfortable with that.
And on the type of game on Saturday night, we've talked about sort of how teams can get at Liverpool this season. How can Brentford hurt Liverpool on Saturday? And do you think it can happen?
Yeah, it can. I think there's a man. I think we will deal. I think we'll deal better with 5-3-2 than we will with 5-2-3. And I think it's difficult for Brentford to play a 5-2-3 because whenever I've caught Brentford this season, the ability of Henderson to move the ball 20, 30, 40 to 70 yards is absolutely crucial. And put doubt into the minds of centre-backs, get players running into channels and all of that. I think he's been brilliant at it. I think he's been brilliant at it his whole career. I think he is underrated as a passer in general, but he is brilliant at playing balls that could just be viewed as creating 50-50s, but actually playing them in a way that it turns it into a 60-40 for his team. He was brilliant at that at his peak playing for Liverpool, especially given the fact that he was working with Mane, Salah and Firmino. That idea of put something into a certain channel and have Sadio Mane anticipate it and have him fight for it. And guess what? Sadio Mane wins it. And people would say afterwards, well, did he mean that? It just looked like a bit of a hook forward. He knew exactly what he was doing. But that said, for him to play for Brentford, I don't think at the minute Brentford could play a 3 up top and have Henderson and only one other in midfield. Yeah. So that helps Liverpool, I think, because it means that it's likely to be 5-3-2 and not 5-2-3. So
I've just go on. Sorry,
go on. No. So yeah,
I was just going to say that I completely forgot to ask you about Jordan Henderson, which is obviously one of the main talking points before going into a Brentford Liverpool match. But what did you make of the signing when we signed it? Because our fan base, few people turned their nose up at it. I thought it was an excellent signing, great bit of business. It's a win-win. He provides so much support for Keith Andrews, especially going into his first job. And I think there were doubts over the quality. There are no doubts anymore because he has been our standout player this season, to be honest.
Yeah, I think he's great, and I think it's a great move, and I think that, well done to everyone who's pulled it together, and Henderson for committing to it as well. I think Henderson might have been able to have an easier life somewhere else, but he's chosen this and wants this, and he'll be an absolute asset for at least the rest of this season, and it wouldn't surprise me if cleverly managed Brentford to get another season out of him, and he's able to do what he does. So yeah, I think it's important that he starts. You can't not pick him, but that means, I think, as I say, you're likely, it's at worst a 5-2-1-2. With Sharda maybe pulling a bit wider and Damsgaard going close to Thiago Igor. But I think that Liverpool will find that a little bit easier to deal with than two flying wide men and go from there. It might be that the game opens up in that direction for Brentford at some point. And also I expect Coyote will obviously be, to an extent, the flying wide man who gets up and down the right. But then Liverpool's job is to pin him back and haven't be concerned about what's happening the other way. I think that Brentford were good first half against Chelsea. I thought they were exceptionally poor first half against Manchester City. I think that Liverpool have got to hope, but also try to bring about that second version in the early going of the game. For me, it's all about the first goal. We got lucky last night. We conceded first. We probably shouldn't have done. We did. And we were able to turn it around relatively quickly. I don't think we'll have the same fortune against Brentford at the minute. I think this Liverpool side will be susceptible to finding things very difficult if they concede the first goal in the game. I think if Liverpool score the first goal in the game, I think they may well go on and win in a way that will look relatively comfortable. But I think if they concede the first goal, then I think they're going to find it a really difficult evening.
Neil, good place to wrap up. A pleasure as always. The Ealing Road podcast will be back after Liverpool with the full-time show. In the meantime, drop your comments down below with your thoughts ahead of the game. Subscribe to the YouTube and Spotify channels. Follow us on the socials at the Ealing Road on Twitter, at Ealing Road Pod on Instagram. Neil, thank you so much, mate. Good luck for the rest of the season, apart from Saturday, of course.
Thank you very much. Take it easy, Mike.